Hello, I'm Deryck Jones and this is my reflective screencasts. I have a degree in fine arts and worked in the creative industry for over 25 years, ultimately co-founding my own creative services studio. For the purpose of this screencast, I will be focusing on the Mentor Observe session, an introduction to AI image generation I delivered for HE4 level students. In line with the Associate Fellowship D1 criteria, I will be addressing the following dimensions: professional values V1 and V3, core knowledge K1, K2 and K3, areas of activity A2 and A4. Through this screencast I may cover more than one dimension through a reflection, so we'll highlight on screen the dimensions covered. All of the courses delivered at the Academy of Live Technology are heavily based in the creative industries and attract an above average number of neurodiverse students. A group profile of learners helps identify additional needs that have been raised by any individual learners. Based on student feedback and reflecting on delivered sessions, PowerPoint presentation has been redesigned with regards to inclusive design in line with the recommendations based by the University of Warwick. If nothing has been highlighted by a learner during session observations, if there's anything that causes concern, a quick informal question of "Is there anything I can do to help you?" is always ready to be asked if appropriate. Race 2014. This became evident with one learner who, through observation, I could see that they were clearly struggling and preoccupied with an issue. Through asking how they were doing, the student felt confident enough to explain the situation, and I was able to comfort them and signpost them to pastoral support services within the academy. With most creative projects, the teacher and the learner go on a creative journey together, rather than heading towards a known outcome. The success of this journey relies on a relational pedagogical approach to developing a strong dialogue between the teacher and the individual learner. I have found that a relational pedagogical approach, as discussed by Catherine Bovell with individual students, helps towards building trust between teacher and the student, which in turn helps develop an understanding of learners' subject knowledge and any extra specific learner needs. With all sessions I have led, there's an informal period prior to the start of the sessions where conversations can contribute to developing the teacher-learner relationship. The relationship building is further developed into the start of the formal teaching-led session where the learner outcomes are defined, so the student is aware of what is expected of them during the session, Big Zettel 2022, and also at the start of the learning where the first stage of Bloom's taxonomy knowledge is addressed. This relational pedagogy, along with a range of other pedagogical approaches, enable a safe space where learning can take place and every student has an equal opportunity to learn. Brookfield 2015. The session started with clearly defined learner outcomes and was followed by an informal discussion around AI image generation. This established the group's level of knowledge and understanding. Adapting the learning based on the level of knowledge, it allowed the scaffolding part of the session to be removed and learners could progress into the practical exercise more quickly. This part of the session resulted in even shorter scaffolding times, improving learner engagement with the session, Knight and Wood 2005, allowing students to take ownership of their learning while also strengthening the connection between theory and practice. I had also converted part of the slide deck into printed handouts. This helped develop an inclusive learning environment, as well as encouraging active learning, enabling students to engage with the handouts at their own pace, to make notes and revisit content as needed. The handouts were printed on white paper, but in response to a student request, the material was also printed on yellow paper to support accessibility for the student who has dyslexia. This creative practical task is based on my own professional experiences where a commercial creative project has to be completed within specific timeframes and constrained to budget. This helps create realistic expectations from a commercial brief and the application of their knowledge within an industry context. A social constructivist approach where I acted as the more knowledgeable other and allowed the students to enter the zone of proximal development, Vygotsky 1978. This practical storyboard task allowed the learners to enter Bloom's third stage application using image prompts for the creation of AI-generated images. This practical experience allowed learners to form opinions and take part in peer-to-peer discussions to start evaluating the generated images via the quality of their image prompts. During this practical exercise, learners were observed and informal discussions were started, while referring to Bloom's application verb and with questions, what would you and what other way? The work produced by the learner also has an opportunity to draw on their own identity and culture, though this is not explicit and is for the learner's discretion when producing their work. Though later on in the session, the idea of identity and cultural representation is explored in the group activity. The final storyboards were made available to the group where they can be peer reviewed. Questions could be used for learners as prompts, based on the last 3 stages of Bloom taxonomy, those being analysis, synthesis and evaluation. While referring to Bloom's verbs with questions, why do you think, what would happen and what is your opinion? A scheduled break was completed halfway through the session, as it has been demonstrated learner performance is maintained after a scheduled break and engagement is maintained until the end of the session, compared to those learners who had not had a scheduled break. Gins et al. 2023 and Smits, Nicholas and Anik 2025. After the break, the session resumed with a short video entitled How AI is Transforming the Creative Industries, which is used to frame the second part of the session as learners enter Bloom's later stages of his taxonomy, analysis, synthesis and evaluation. The group were organised into 3 smaller groups of learners. Each learner within a group was tasked with a title related to ethical considerations of AI content and asked to research it and then be ready to present their learnings with the wider group. A social constructivist approach. This enabled learners to enter what Vygotsky refers to as the zone of proximal development, where learners can start building on their existing knowledge through the support of their group and by a more knowledgeable person, that being me, the teacher. Vygotsky, 1978. This cooperative space allows each individual learner to be responsible for their own learning, but also contribute and feel valued to their team's success in the subsequent knowledge sharing to the wider group. Bloom et al. 1956. After the set allocated time, the groups came back together and each learner, when requested by subject title, were invited to present their findings to the group. This in turn encouraged peer-to-peer discussion with the evaluation in connection with Bloom's taxonomy stage comprehension. Applying the verbs and potential question prompts, what can you say about, how would you rephrase, and what's the main idea? When the sessions were near to finish, learners were asked to complete an online multiple choice quiz. This acts as a formative assessment for individual learners and also a way for the teacher to measure the success of the learning outcomes set for the session. At the finish, learners are also asked to reflect on the session and leave feedback via online feedback forms. The overall feedback has proved to be positive, but any comments or recommendations are considered, shared amongst colleagues to discuss and validate the learners' concerns. If felt appropriate, then implemented with an achievable timescale. As most creative projects are potentially individual activities and based in the classroom, learners are usually working within software interfaces and behind screens. Using constructive alignment theory, Biggs et al. 2022, to help define learning outcomes and lesson plans, I started to introduce various pedagogical approaches that took the learners away from behind the screens and into group activities, where cooperative learning and peer-to-peer knowledge sharing could occur. The range of activities received positive feedback from the learners and were a welcome part of their learning, and students who are engaged with learning demonstrate improved academic performance. Freeman et al. 2014. At the end of each session, I allow time for reflective practice, and using Gibbs' reflective cycle, this allows me to consider the reflection effectively. Through informal conversations, observing learner contributions to group discussions, practical exercises, end of session multiple choice quizzes and learner feedback forms are all used to measure whether the learning outcomes have been achieved and learning has taken place, or whether learning outcomes, lesson plans or resources need to be reviewed. The learning from various forms of feedback and colleague discussion as observations allow for me to create and implement an action plan to deliver updates to the learning outcomes, lesson plans or resources using SMART targets ahead of future delivered sessions. Through the application of the D1 criteria, I can appreciate the implications of each dimension and when drawing on these dimensions in my teaching, helping to bring together the best of my skills as a teacher and facilitator to active learning and increase the opportunity for learning to happen for the individual and the wider group. Still being relatively new to teaching, I can recognise that with my natural enthusiasm for the subject and the willingness to share my knowledge alongside the pedagogical approaches such as scaffolding, constructive alignment, cooperative learning, colleague observations, reflection and continual professional development, I can deliver a more effective active learning experiences and help address individual student learning needs. For example, the inclusion of more digital tools to monitor progress throughout the session as well as the end, review time allocated to practical tasks and exploring the role of flipped classrooms, all of which can only increase the opportunity for active learning to occur within my timetabled sessions. The final slide shows the reading undertaken to support my session deliveries and references within this presentation. Thank you for watching.